Before the plastic lights and the laughter of children running through the streets, there was another night. A night when masks were not for fun but for survival. When people hid their faces not to frighten, but to keep the spirits outside from recognizing them. In the breath of the wind, in the crackle of the fire, humanity felt the world grow thin, as if a single touch could tear it. And through that tear, something else was watching back. Not demons, but the memory of the earth, of the seasons, of the souls who came before. That night had a name long forgotten, Samhain. The first chill of the dark season had begun to fall. The fields lay bare, holding only the scent of straw and smoke. The sun set earlier than it should, and the sky was no longer a gentle shelter. It hung heavy, bending low, as though waiting for the night to swallow the world. In every village, the hearth fires were extinguished. No light, no roosters, no laughter of children, only silence. A silence so deep that one could hear the beating of one's own heart. When the communal fire was raised, everyone gathered. The men carried wood, the women dry grass, and the children stood close, clutching one another's hands. They knew this fire was not just light, it was a boundary, a thin veil between the living and the dead. On the night of Samhain, the Celts believed that the doorway between worlds opened. The spirits of their ancestors could return, walking the paths they once knew, finding their old homes, sitting by the fire to hear their names spoken again. But not all spirits were kind. Some wandered lost in the dark, bringing with them the chill of the wind, the sound of weeping, and a terrible hunger. To avoid being recognized, the living wore masks, cloaked themselves in animal hides, and imitated the dead, a delicate exchange between fear and cunning. The smoke rose and mingled with the night mist. Far away, on the slope of a hill, people swore they saw lights drifting, small flames, floating in the air like candles carried by unseen hands. Some said they were the souls of the departed. Others insisted they were nothing more than marsh fire, but no one spoke. Deep down they all knew this night did not belong to them. Time slowed. Every sound softened. The smell of burning grass, the damp earth, the wind through the leaves, they blended into a song older than memory. A song with no words, but a rhythm everyone knew. The heartbeat of the world as it turned to its darker half. And as the fire roared, its light dancing across the masks, the people understood something simple and eternal. To survive the winter, one must first learn how to walk with the dark. To the modern mind, time is an arrow. It flies straight ahead, leaving the past behind like dust on a road. But to our Celtic ancestors, time was never linear. It turned quietly, eternally, like the wheel of the Sunday. Each year, as light withdrew and darkness grew long, they did not say, "A year has ended." They said, "The wheel has returned to its shadow." In that turning, there was no beginning and no end, only the seasons trading places. They believed that humans, trees, and even souls followed this same rhythm, to blossom, to wither, and to return again, like the breathing of the earth itself. The wheel of the year was divided into two halves, the bright and the dark. The bright half began in May, with the festival of Beltane, when the fields were green, calves filled the meadows, and the sun felt young again. The dark half began with Samhain, the moment when all things slowed, faded, and slipped away. These two halves were not enemies. They were the twin heartbeats of a single living world. When the light grew weary, the darkness held it. When the night was spent, the dawn found its way home. The Celts did not fear death, for they saw it as a door leading back into the turning cycle. Winter was not an ending, but the necessary sleep of the Mother Earth, so that when spring returned, life might awaken anew. Thus, the night of Samhain was not merely a farewell to summer, it was a welcome to stillness, a pause where the world took one deep breath before beginning again. Those who lived by this rhythm understood that humans were but a spoke on the great wheel. When one person passed away, their soul did not vanish. It drifted to the other side, where the ancestors waited. And when a child was born, people believed it was an old soul returning in new form. There was no finality, only continuation. The wheel turned with the sun's path, but it also beat in time with the human heart. In the bright season, one labored, planted, and loved. In the dark, one learned to be silent, to listen, to remember. It was not merely a calendar of the land, but of the soul. Each time Samhain arrived, they did not mark the days, they exhaled softly, as if the universe itself had paused for a moment between breaths. And when the first wind swept across the fields carrying the scent of cold and smoke, they knew the wheel had completed its circle. Night had risen again, and in that chill breath, the world began its next cycle, slower, deeper, and quieter than before. Summer faded, like a dying dream. In the fields, the last sheaves of grain had been gathered and hung in the rafters to dry, while the cattle were driven down into the valleys, away from the cold winds rolling off the hills. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, hay, and soil resting after the harvest. People called this moment by a simple yet heavy name, Samhain, the end of summer. The name sounded gentle, but in the hearts of the ancients, it carried a quiet tremor, for when summer ended, they knew winter would bring more than frost, and wind it would bring hunger, sickness, and death. No one could be sure if they would survive to see the wheel of the year turn again. And so, before the cold descended, they held their festival not in joy, but in farewell. A farewell to the light, to the last warm days of the year. On the final morning of the season, fog curled over the fields like smoke rising from another world. Children ran between the straw stacks, while adults slaughtered the weakest animals, curing the meat above the fire, in preparation for the long months ahead. The sound of knives striking wood, the hiss of the flames, and the wind whispering through dry branches formed a strange kind of music, melancholy, yet peaceful. The Celts understood that endings were not to be feared, but embraced as part of life's rhythm. The trees must shed their leaves, the soil must rest, and people must learn to turn inward, to endure the stillness before renewal. On Samhain night, as bonfires burned on the hills and silhouettes danced in the red glow, the people whispered prayers for a gentle winter. Inside every home they stacked food, gathered firewood, and hung bundles of dried herbs in the windows to keep warmth in and dark spirits out. On the table, they placed a small cake for the dead, because one never knew when a wandering soul might visit once the night fell. They did not weep, nor beg for mercy. They simply watched the fire in silence and understood what every flame was saying. Nothing lasts forever, yet nothing is ever truly gone. When the moon rose, spilling silver light across the low roofs, the village fell into stillness. The night had truly begun, and in the cold breath of the air, everyone felt it. The summer had departed, carrying with it the laughter of the earth, leaving behind a long and sacred quiet, a quiet made for waiting, a quiet made for courage. There are days that belong neither to summer nor to winter, days suspended in the pause between the world's two breaths. The Celts called such moments liminal, the fragile threshold where everything feels delicate, breakable as dew trembling on a leaf. The realm of the living and the realm of spirits, on that day, are divided by nothing more than a breath, a curl of smoke, a flicker of fire in the wind. The sun rose low, pale and hesitant, as though afraid to take its place. The grass on the fields had turned grey, and the river mirrored a sky of cold silver. In the villages, silence hung as people prepared for Samhain, the night they called the hinge of the year. Whenever the great wheel of time turned to this point, they believed that every boundary softened, the line between day and night, old and new, the living and the dead, When the sun slipped behind the hills, the air itself seemed to shift. For a heartbeat, the wind stopped and then blew from the opposite direction, as if the world had turned over. The birds fell silent. The smell of smoke thickened. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. Tonight was different. Tonight, the road between two worlds stood open. On the hilltop, the Druids kindled the first fire. They were wrapped in white cloaks, oak branches in hand. As the flames rose, golden light rippled across the faces of those gathered. They stood in a circle, not singing, not pleading, only gazing into the fire, as though staring into the beating heart of the earth itself. Somewhere beyond the hills, they said, the spirits had begun to cross. Some were ancestors. Others were older beings from before the age of man. In their homes, families left the door slightly ajar and set an extra place at the table. No one said, "The dead will come." They simply said, "The guests will return." This reverence was not born of fear, but of understanding. Some things need not be seen to be real. Some souls never truly depart. Then night descended fully. Mist rose from the valley and curled through the village streets. Small lanterns glimmered along the dirt paths, each one a gentle invitation to the other world. The air no longer felt divided. The wind carried whispers faint, familiar like someone softly calling an old name. And in that fleeting moment, humanity touched what it had always longed for, the quiet certainty that we have never truly been alone between the two worlds. To the Celts, the world was never limited to what the eye could see. Beneath the soil, behind the veil of mist, they believed another realm existed, a kingdom where the old gods and ancient spirits still lived, separate, yet intertwined with humankind. They called it the other world. It was not heaven nor hell, but a parallel world where the seasons never changed, the light was forever dim, and time did not move. It was said that there, the grass never withered, the waters never dried, and the wind sang songs that never ended. Those who were fortunate or foolish enough to wander into that realm might return, but they would never be the same. For in that place, a single night could last 100 years. And when they stepped back into the mortal world, everything they had known had already turned to dust. Yet the Celts did not see the other world through fear. They regarded it as a natural extension of life itself. The ancestors, the heroes, even the gods dwelt there still, within hollow hills, deep lakes, and the winds that slid through the oak groves. Their world and ours were woven together like the two sides of a single cloth. Lift one corner, and you could glimpse the other. When Samhain arrived, the boundary thinned. People could feel that presence more vividly than ever before. The wind blew differently, carrying the scent of distant fields, places that did not exist. The moonlight felt strange, as if shining from another sky. Some swore they heard soft music drifting from the hills, or laughter in the dark, not threatening, only greeting. In the tales told around the fire, the other world was not home only to gentle spirits. It was also inhabited by beings of terrible beauty, neither good nor evil, the forgotten gods who once ruled the land before humankind arrived. They were called by many names: Tuatha De Danann, the fair folk, the shining ones. Out of respect and a touch of caution, people referred to them simply as the good people, the noble ones. And on the night of Samhain, as the firelight flickered and the shadows danced, the living bowed their heads toward the distant hills, where they believed those ancient guests passed by. They did not beg, nor banish, they honored, because they knew their own lives depended on something far greater. Between light and darkness, between mortals and gods, they learned to live with the other world, not to conquer it, not to yield to it, but to move in quiet balance, like the breath of the universe on an autumn night. The night of Samhain came slowly, like the earth exhaling. On the mist-covered hills, the Druids' bonfires were already burning, glowing against the dark sky, like the twin eyes of two worlds gazing into one another. The villagers gathered, carrying masks of carved wood and animal hide faces, both human and something else entirely. They did not wear them to frighten spirits, but to remain unseen. For when the door between worlds opens, it is best not to let those on the other side know who you are. The air was thick with the scent of ash and half-burned hay. Sparks spun upward, swirling in the wind like tiny lost souls searching for their way home. Whispers drifted between the houses. Someone claimed to have seen a light gliding over the hill. Another swore they heard footsteps behind them, but no one was afraid. Fear was something they had already learned to live with, just as they had learned to survive the winter. Children were told not to step outside once the main fire was lit. Adults left small cakes at their doorsteps, cups of warm milk on the windowsills, offerings for the gentle spirits returning home. They believed that if welcomed, these unseen guests would bless the household and ease the coming winter. But if forgotten, they might turn cold with anger, bringing frost and illness in their wake. At midnight, the wind changed direction. The village lay bathed in amber light, veiled by thin fog rising from the valley. The feeling was uncanny, not human, not divine, but something in between, as if both realms were breathing together. Silence fell, for everyone sensed this was the sacred hour, the moment when all boundaries dissolved. And in that fragile stillness, you might see a figure standing at the edge of the hill, hair drifting in the wind, eyes glimmering like fire. Perhaps it was only a trick of the light, or perhaps it was a spirit looking back upon the world it once knew. The fire burned on, the masks, the animal hides, the shadows circling the flame, formed a vision both haunting and beautiful. Above, the full moon hung heavy and bright enough that one could see their breath shimmer in the cold air. The night of Samhain had truly opened no borders, no line between waking and sleep, between life and what lingers beyond. There was only one truth left. The world was never divided. It was breathing in unison, and within that breath, humankind, gods, and the dead all existed together in one long, silent, miraculous night. Amid the mist and the golden glow of fire, figures in white cloaks emerged: the Druids, the ones believed to be the bridge between humankind and the other world. They were not kings nor sorcerers, but those who understood the language of the earth, the wind, and time itself. In every village, they were the memory keepers and the guides who led the people into the turning of a new season. When the night of Samhain arrived, every hearth in every home was extinguished. It was the oldest ritual of all to let the old light die so that a new one could be born. The village sank into complete darkness, broken only by the sound of wind slipping through doorways, the distant lowing of cattle, and the faint, smoky scent of ash. People sat in silence, hands clasped, feeling the last warmth of the dying year. Then, from the hilltop where the Druids had gathered, they saw the first spark ignite. The sacred fire was not kindled with ordinary wood, but with oak, the tree of the gods. Two pieces were rubbed together until a spark leapt forth, fragile yet proud against the night. This flame was more than heat. It was the soul of the community, the symbol of life reborn from the death of the old season. The Druids fed the fire with dried oak branches and murmured words known only to them, not spells, but ancient thanks offered to the earth and the Sunday. When the flames grew bright, the villagers stepped forward one by one. They did not kneel or bow. Instead, they walked slowly between two great fires, letting the smoke wash over them, cleansing all that had passed. The air was thick with the sweet, sharp scent of burning oak, mingled with the cold of the night. Each step was a prayer for health, for a gentle winter, for peace in the soul. Children clung to their mothers' hands, eyes wide as the firelight scattered across the ground like 1,000 newborn stars. The Druids stood still, their faces glowing in the blaze. They spoke no words, yet everyone felt it, the sense that they had crossed something unseen. The darkness no longer threatened. It had become a vast blanket wrapping the world in safety. When the ritual ended, each family was given a single ember from the sacred fire, a small, living piece of the world's heart. They carried it home carefully, protecting it as though it were the breath of life itself. The night of Samhain drifted on, but from that moment forward, the light in every hearth was no longer just its own. All of it came from one flame, one breath, one miracle awakened by the keepers of the fire between two worlds. When the first spark of Samhain flared to life, the darkness drew back. The hill was bathed in a warm amber light, shimmering like the breath of the sun returning from a long sleep. The Druids circled the blaze, bowing slightly as if greeting an ancient god. From the mist below, the villagers emerged, their eyes catching the glow. No one spoke. They simply stood before the fire, letting its light reveal their faces and feeling the current of energy weaving through the air, the energy of renewal, of cleansing, of life reborn. This was no ordinary fire of wood and smoke. It was born of ritual, of labor, and of belief. The Celts believed this flame held the soul of the sun itself trapped during the dark half of the year, and that the night of Samhain was when humanity helped it rise again. They called it the fire of return. The higher it burned, the gentler the coming winter would be. The Druids moved in a slow circle, scattering salt and dried herbs into the glowing coals. The smoke rose in spiraling ribbons, carrying with it the scent of mint, heather, and a touch of sweet pine resin. In that fragrant haze, people swore they saw figures flicker and fade, perhaps ancestors, perhaps only the play of wind and light, but every head bowed, as though they truly stood before their own beloved dead. When the fire blazed at its peak, the villagers began to pass between two of the great flames. Their livestock went first, to cleanse them of sickness and drive away misfortune. Then came the people one by one, or hand in hand, walking slowly through the sacred smoke, feeling the heat brush their skin and the tiny crackle that seemed to echo in their hearts. It was not superstition, but reverence, a way of touching the divine with bare hands. The fire itself was a promise. That light would always find its way back, no matter how long the night. When the rite was done, a single ember was drawn from the fire and placed into a small clay vessel. Each family carried their ember home, wrapped in coarse cloth to protect it from the wind. From that ember, they would rekindle their hearth, lighting a new flame from the same sacred source. And so, though the winter would come, no one would truly be left in darkness. On the hilltop, the Druids watched as the line of torches disappeared into the distance like a trail of fireflies. They knew their task was complete. They had not merely kindled fire, they had rekindled faith. On this night of Samhain, when the worlds touched, a single sacred flame was enough to keep both realms breathing in unison, one steady pulse of warmth that would carry the living through the long waiting winter. When the ceremony on the hill ended, the people quietly made their way back. In each hand, a glowing ember lay wrapped in coarse cloth, giving off a faint but steady light. They carried it through the mist, along the dark earthen paths, their footsteps blending with the whispering wind. That ember was more than fire, it was a promise. A fragment of sacred light carried from the hilltop to every hearth, a reminder that even in the dark half of the year, humanity could still share the warmth of the Sunday. Inside their low stone houses, they placed the ember on the hearth. The new flame was kindled with dry oak and the last scraps of harvest straw. The light spread softly, golden as honey. It reflected on their faces, pushing the darkness back by a small, precious distance. The mother fetched water. The father laid another log. The child sat still, watching the flame as if it were a tiny creature breathing in the quiet. No one spoke much, They simply listened to the crackle of the wood, the most familiar sound of the long months ahead. They believed that if the fire went out, misfortune would ride in on the wind. So each night, before sleep, the last person awake would place a small piece of wood on the coals and whisper a single wish: burn softly, but never die. It was not just habit, it was a ritual to keep the soul of the home alive. The fire was also the thread that bound the community. When someone came to visit, they would pause outside for a moment, breathing in the scent of smoke, feeling the warmth that seeped from within. If the hearth fire burned bright, they knew the household was safe. If the home was cold, they would leave a little bundle of dry wood or a piece of bread at the door, a silent blessing between neighbors. Outside, the wind still howled through the valley, but within, the sacred fire glowed gently, painting the stone walls and wooden beams in shades of gold. On the table, the small cake for the ancestors remained untouched. They believed that while the family slept, the guests from the other world might step across the threshold, sit beside the fire, and warm their hands in the light their descendants had carried home. The night of Samhain stretched long, but in every house the fire still burned. Not fierce, not blinding, but just enough to remind them, darkness never truly wins. As long as a single spark survives, no matter how small, winter can never swallow the world whole. When the hearth fire had settled and the village lay in perfect silence, the Celts entered the deeper half of the Samhain night, the night of signs. This was no longer a time for communal ritual, but a moment of solitude, when each person listened for what the coming year might be whispering to them. It was believed that on this night, when the veil between worlds was gone, even time itself became soft. The future was no longer sealed. Those who were quiet enough could gaze through the fire and glimpse what waited ahead: a harsh winter, a child soon to be born, or a name that would fade before spring's return. But no one sought knowledge out of greed. They asked only enough to know how to walk forward. Young women dropped apples into the stream, believing that the one who appeared in their dreams tonight would be their future husband. Some tossed hazelnuts into the hearth, watching which pairs burned together to divine love's fate. Others placed a mirror before the fire, hoping to see the face of an ancestor or someone long gone. Each act was a small prayer, gentle as breath, without demand or fear. The Druids taught that fire illuminated more than the world, it illuminated the soul. To look into it was to see both one's fear and one's longing. And so, on the night of Samhain, watching the flame was also an act of reflection to see what still burned within and what had already grown cold. Even the children took part, wide-eyed and innocent. They gathered around the hearth as the elders told old stories, tales of kind spirits, of gods who had withdrawn from the human world, and of how their ancestors learned to live with the darkness instead of fighting it. In the firelight, their eyes shone like small stars, as if they could see things the adults no longer could. When midnight passed, silence returned. Only the wind outside and the faint crackle of the fire remained. One by one, the villagers drifted into sleep, letting their dreams carry them across the last unseen threshold. No one knew where those dreams came from, whether from the realm of men or from the other world, but by dawn, each would wake knowing the same truth. They had crossed the first night of the new year, and the seeds of prophecy had already been planted deep within their souls. And then, as if keeping its promise, the morning arrived. The first light touched the mist, brushed the roof still heavy with sleep, and shimmered upon the thin trails of hearth smoke. A new cycle had begun, and the signs of the night before, faint though they were, would follow them through the long winter to come. After the night of signs, the world crossed into a new threshold. A silver dawn spread across the fields, and mist hung low like a veil between yesterday and today. Samhain did not simply mark the turning of a year, it marked the arrival of an ancient visitor, winter. To the Celts, winter was not an enemy but a messenger, a herald of trials. It came slowly, but once it arrived, it claimed everything: the sky, the land, even the human heart. The days grew shorter, the nights stretched long, and the wind carried a chill that felt as though it blew from the other world itself. It was not merely the cold of the air, but the silence of the earth sinking into sleep. Yet before the frost fully claimed the land, there was one last act to perform, to thank the light that had passed, and to welcome the dark as one would a stern but necessary guest. On the hills still streaked with dying embers, the Druids walked in slow circles, speaking prayers for the weakening Sunday. They knew that without winter, there could be no spring. The rest of the earth was the price of its rebirth. In the villages, the elders told the children that at this moment, the herald of winter walked among them. No one had ever seen his face, yet all could feel his presence in the wind's sharp cry, in the first thin layer of frost on the roof, in the smaller, quieter flames of the hearth. He was not a cruel god, only a reminder that the world needed stillness to begin again. So the people prepared. They counted their food, stacked their wood, patched the children's cloaks, and sealed the walls with mud to keep out the drafts. Every task was done in silence, as though it were its own ritual, the ritual of survival. Everything essential began with Samhain, the flame carried from the hill, the omens of the night before, and the faith that no matter how long the darkness lasted, dawn would return. As the shadows deepened day by day, they did not despair. Within every home, the sacred fire still burned, a symbol of human endurance against the relentless turning of the world. They knew that winter was only time's great trial, and that even the smallest light was enough to guide the way. Out in the night wind, one might hear something faint and distant, the footsteps of winter passing through the valley, carrying with it the breath of frost and the scent of early snow. But within the warm houses, people simply held one another closer, gazed into the fire, and whispered, "We are ready." Centuries later, strangers came from the South, Roman soldiers, scholars, and chroniclers. They saw the Samhain fires and could not understand them. To their eyes, the hilltop flames, the animal hides, the midnight rituals could only mean one thing: barbarism and sorcery. And so, they rewrote the story in the language of fear. In the old Roman records, Samhain became a night of sacrifice, a day of blood and darkness. Julius Caesar himself wrote of giant wicker figures, in which the Celts were said to burn prisoners alive as offerings to their gods. The tale spread quickly, becoming a convenient symbol of savagery, a justification for conquest, for civilizing a people the Romans deemed dangerous. But the truth, like the Samhain fire itself, was gentler. No evidence of such human sacrifices has ever been found. No bodies in the ashes, no signs of mass slaughter. The rituals, if they involved fire at all, were symbolic: straw effigies, offerings of meat, flowers, and bread, what they called gifts of gratitude for the season now past. The Celts did not pray to their gods out of fear. They spoke to the earth, to the sun, and to their ancestors. In their worldview, humanity did not stand above nature, it belonged to it. They knew no god required blood, only respect. And when the Romans finally left, the fire of Samhain continued to burn quietly through the generations, needing no approval, no name, only remembrance. Centuries later still, when Christianity spread across Europe, the missionaries found the old festival still alive now, a blend of old and new. They could not erase it, so they renamed it, giving it a different face: All Hallows Eve, the night before All Saints' Day. Yet beneath that borrowed mask, Samhain endured unchanged in spirit. Today, many still mistake Samhain for a night of demons and wickedness. believing the Celts lived in superstition. But listen closely, and you'll hear the truth. They did not fear the dark, they honored it. For they understood that without night, the sun could never rise. Legends can be twisted, names can fade, but the essence remains. Each time we light a candle, each time we watch a flickering flame on Halloween night, we are doing what the Celts did thousands of years ago, honoring the fragile border between life and death, and reminding ourselves that even in darkness, light always has a home. Time passed. The fires on the hills faded, but the memory of them burned quietly in human hearts. When the new faith reached Ireland and Scotland, the first Christian monks stepped into those mist-covered lands, carrying their scriptures and their quills. They did not come only to preach, they came to record a vanishing world. And so, within the cold stone walls of monasteries, hands in brown robes began to rewrite the old tales. They wrote with black ink upon sheepskin, by the trembling glow of oil lamps. They copied the legends of the Celts, but to make them survive in the new order, they had to change the names of the gods. The lords of the other world became kings. The goddesses of harvest became queens or witches. And the mighty heroes of myth were recast as mortals with strange powers, living in ancient times. Everyone knew were never meant to be real. Yet even as the names changed, the soul of the stories endured. Within every epic, one could still hear the breath of Samhain, the doors opening between worlds, the spirits returning, the fire burning in the endless dark. The gods, though demoted, still shone with a strange light, the light of memory, of things no faith or ink could erase. The monks did not mean to destroy. They too were enchanted. Between prayers, they listened to villagers speak of river goddesses, of giants sleeping beneath the hills, of songs rising from the burial mounds. And so, in their sacred manuscripts between the lines about saints and miracles, they left small spaces of silence where the old spirits could still hide. Those books, the Book of Invasions, the Ulster Cycle, the Book of Leinster, became bridges between two worlds. They preserved not only the words, but the heartbeat of a forgotten faith. Through them, we know that Samhain was never truly lost. It merely changed its form, hiding in stories, in songs, and in every autumn flame rekindled once more. And perhaps, on the longest nights, when the wind howled through the cloister windows, a few monks set down their pens, gazed into the candle before them, and smiled. They understood that though they had dressed the tales in new robes, they had also unintentionally, lovingly kept the old soul alive. The stories were rewritten, yes, but never forgotten, for they belonged to both realms, the world of faith and the world of memory. When the great wheel of the year turned to its final point, the Celts knew they were living through the last day of the old year. It was not a date marked on any calendar as we know it today, but a long, sacred pause, a moment when time itself seemed to stop and take a breath. From dusk until dawn, the world hung between two heartbeats. One year was dying, and another had not yet been born. On the hilltops, the great bonfires that had burned through the night were now dying embers, sending thin spirals of smoke into the morning sky. The Druids moved slowly around the ashes, collecting the glowing fragments and placing them into small clay vessels for safekeeping. They believed each ember still held the spirit of the sacred flame, the light that would guide humankind through the long winter ahead. Down in the village, the Samhain morning was heavy with mist. People rose early to clean their homes, sweeping out the old ashes and sprinkling herbs along doorways. This was the final ritual of the year, a symbolic clearing of what was burdensome or sorrowful. The elders said that if a home was clean and its hearth fire still burned, the wandering spirits would not lose their way, and the dark season would pass in peace. By afternoon, As the sun weakened and drifted toward the horizon, the villagers gathered once more upon the hill of fire. They brought bread, apples, and mead, not as an offering of sacrifice, but for what they called the farewell feast of the old year. Laughter mingled with the wind, and the crackle of fire blended with slow, haunting songs that sounded like lullabies for the dying year. In the quiet of their hearts, each person remembered what had been lost, who had gone, and the promises left unfulfilled. When night fell again, all the lights in the village were extinguished once more save for the great communal fire. It was the most solemn moment of all, the death of the old year. No one moved. Only the steady rhythm of breath and heartbeat filled the silence. They gazed into the flames, and in that golden light, they saw the year replayed before them, the harvests gathered, the children born, the loved ones buried. Then, one druid stepped forward, cast a handful of dried seeds into the embers, and whispered, "Sleep well, old year." The fire leapt high, flaring bright enough to touch the stars, an answering gesture from the sun to its faithful watchers. And in that blazing moment, everyone understood. Endings were not to be mourned, but to be witnessed with gratitude. For only when the old year dies can the new one be born. That night, the Celts slept in the fading warmth of Samhain, so that when they opened their eyes at dawn, they would awaken into the new cycle where light would rise again from the ashes, like a soul reborn. The final night of the old year passed in silence. On the hilltop, the ashes cooled, yet beneath that pale grey layer, warmth still pulsed faintly, the proof that the sun still lived. As the first light of the new year crept through the mist, the Druids gathered once more. They knelt, pressing their hands to the cold earth before raising them to the sky. They called to the sun by its ancient name, a name long carried away by the wind, but still echoing in the heartbeat of the land. A new fire was kindled, not to give light but to call the sun to remember its path home after its long journey through the night. It was believed that if all flames were ever extinguished, the world would sink into eternal darkness. So the people lit small fires on the hills, in their courtyards, in the palms of their hands. Each spark was a voice, a prayer, a plea. Come back to us. Those tiny flames shimmered through the fog, forming a delicate ribbon of light across the fields. Children laughed. The elders smiled. They did not see the sun as a distant god, but as an old friend, one who had wandered away into the dark and was now finding its way home. The sun needed no offerings, only remembrance. And Samhain itself was that remembrance, a song of memory sung once each year, so that the light would not forget the road back to the world. When the first golden rays broke through the clouds and touched the dew-soaked earth, everyone stood still. There was no cheering, no applause, only silence, the silence of gratitude. For they knew that in this fragile moment, life had been reborn. The death of the old season had done its duty, making way for the first returning warmth. The Druids took the glowing embers left from the night before and placed them in the great hearth at the center of the village. The fire roared to life, its light spreading from house to house. The children ran with small torches, carrying the flame home to their families. From one fire, hundreds were born, and for a brief, beautiful moment, the entire village glowed like a fallen constellation. The sun had returned, not by miracle, but by human faith. They did not know how harsh the coming winter would be, but as that light touched their eyes, each person felt stronger, for they had just witnessed the oldest truth of all. After every long night, the light always knows its way home. From the early morning, smoke once again rose from every rooftop. The scent of oak wood, baking bread, and damp earth mingled together, drifting over the misty hills. The whole village seemed to breathe as one sharing the same warmth, the same quiet faith. Every home, every hearth, burned with the same flame, the sacred fire kindled on the night of Samhain. And because of that, they believed that when these fires burned together, it was not only light that connected them, but the beating of human hearts. Inside the small stone houses, the hearths glowed bright. The mother stirred a pot of soup made from turnips and oats. The father mended a woolen cloak in the soft amber glow. A child sat before the fire, tracing patterns in the ashes, imagining their finger was touching the Sunday. No one hurried. Every movement was quiet and careful, as if any sudden sound might shatter the fragile peace that filled the room. The Celts called the hearth fire the heart of the dark season. When the wind howled outside, they gathered close and shared stories, tales of gods who slept beneath the earth, of spirits finding their way home, of light once lost and found again. Each story was not told to pass the time, but to strengthen belief that the world, though always changing, was still bound together by an invisible thread, linking humankind to the cosmos. The fire did more than warm them. It taught them patience. It burned slowly, eating through the wood, dimming and then flaring back to life. It whispered a lesson. True strength is not in the blaze, but in endurance. When the flames waned, no one panicked. They simply added another log, blew softly, and waited. They believed, as their ancestors had before them, that as long as one cared for it, the fire would never die. When night fell, the village glowed again, lit by torches, hearths, and candles set upon windowsills. From afar, it looked like a golden island floating in a sea of night. Children slept on their mothers' laps, while the elders sat still, watching the firelight dance across the walls. No one spoke it aloud, but all of them knew this was the true magic of Samhain. Not the spirits, not the doors between worlds, but humanity's power to hold on to one another through faith and flame. And when the winter wind howled through the cracks in the walls, they did not fear it. They simply smiled, pulled the blankets close, and listened to the crackling fire, the heartbeat of the village. Through that long night, in the heart of the dark season, the fire sang softly, warmly, and eternally. As night once more descended over the valley, thin ribbons of smoke drifted upward from every rooftop, mingling together and gliding slowly across the deep violet sky. The Celts believed that smoke was not merely the breath of fire, it was the path by which human prayers ascended to the heavens. And so, on the first evening of the new year, they added more wood to their hearths, burning bundles of dried herbs so that the smoke might rise high, carrying each person's hopes into the waiting sky. On the wooden tables, small cakes were set beside half-burned candles. Everyone had something to send, a wish for a milder winter, for fertile fields to return, for peace to reach those resting in the other world. Their prayers were never grand or demanding. They were soft, simple murmurs like breath slipping into the dark. Let the light not fade. Let the earth remember the way back to spring. Children wrote their wishes with bits of charcoal on the damp ground. The adults tossed handfuls of grain into the flames, part offering, part reminder that all things must one day return to the same eternal circle. When the seeds crackled in the fire, they smiled. To them, every tiny pop from the embers was an answer whispered back from the universe. At the center of the village, the Druids walked slowly in a circle, sprinkling ashes from the sacred fire over rooftops and tools. They called it the breath of the sun god. The ashes of Samhain were thought to be holy, spread over the fields. They promised fertility for the coming season. Scattered around doorways, they protected the home from wandering spirits. People watched in silence, the glow of the fire reflected in their eyes, understanding without words that this was a moment of connection between people and the earth, between the present and the eternal. That night, the wind was calm and the sky clear. Smoke rose high, curling into pale ribbons beneath the moonlight. Some said they saw a hand in it. Others, the shape of a bird. or a face smiling down. Whatever they saw, it filled them with the same quiet certainty that the world was listening. As the fire burned low, no one hurried to leave. They stayed together, watching the smoke fade into the night, then lifting their gaze to the wide sky, where faint stars flickered like glowing embers. And in that still moment, every heart felt lighter, for they knew that in the depths of winter, their small prayers would drift away, carried on the breath of the earth and sky, to return with spring, as seeds quietly waking beneath the soil. After the smoke rose into the sky, the Celts believed that not only human prayers were heard, but that the spirits themselves began their journey home. Not all were gentle ancestors. Some had no homes to return to, no names left to be spoken. These were the forgotten ones, drifting between the two worlds. The Celts called them, with quiet tenderness, the wandering ones. On the night of Samhain, they were said to roam along forest paths, moving through the mist and the smoke. People said that if you heard footsteps behind you and turned, you'd see only the wind. But if you stood still and listened, you might feel their presence, a soft chill in the air. Not menacing, only sorrowful. These souls sought not to harm, but to find warmth in memory. That is why the living never locked their doors on Samhain night. They left them slightly open, with a small candle and a piece of bread by the window. No one could be sure the spirits would truly come, but they did it nonetheless, year after year. A simple gesture, yet one filled with compassion, an offering of space for the unseen, for those who had nowhere else to rest. Inside each home, when the wind stirred the fire's flame, no one rushed to steady it. They smiled, believing a quiet guest had passed by, leaving a greeting in the light. Children were taught that if a candle flickered brighter than usual, they should whisper softly, "Welcome home." It was not a prayer, but a promise, a way to remind the living that no one is ever truly forgotten. Stories told that sometimes a kind spirit lingered a little longer. It would sit by the hearth, warming its hands over the sacred fire carried home by its descendants. In the morning, people might find a ring of ash on the floor, a sign that the visitor had departed, leaving behind a blessing for the coming season. These wandering souls were part of the world, like the wind and the fog. The Celts never tried to banish them. They accepted them as a natural part of existence, for they understood that in the eternal cycle of seasons, everyone must one day journey away and someday return. And perhaps, in some future year, on some distant Samhain night, we too will walk through the mist, pausing to listen to the crackle of a fire in an old familiar home, and find, waiting for us, a single small candle left, burning to light our way back. The night of Samhain was drawing to a close. The smoke had faded, the fires burned down to embers, and the night wind lay thin and cold over the village like a veil. Yet in that quiet, the Celts believed that not all souls had gone. Some lingered still, the wanderers, with no one left to remember them, no place to return to. They called them, with a hush of sorrow, the forgotten ones. No one knew who they were. Perhaps a child who died before being named, a traveler who perished far from home, or a spirit from an age before humankind. They were lost between worlds, belonging neither to the living nor fully to the other world. And on the night when boundaries dissolved, they drifted toward the last remaining light, the villages, the hearths still burning, hoping that someone might see them. The Celts never drove them away. In their hearts there was no such thing as good spirits or evil spirits, only souls that had not yet found peace. So, in the final hours of the night, as the festival neared its end, people kindled small fires at the edges of their villages, not to guide the living, but to light the path for the dead. Across the hills, little flames flickered in a long, trembling line. Travelers passing by would leave small gifts, a piece of bread, a handful of grain, or simply a stone placed gently on the ground. They whispered soft farewells into the mist. "Go on, don't be afraid. The light is ahead." Those words, light as breath, rose into the fog, carrying human compassion towards souls they would never know. In some houses, people claimed to hear faint knocking at the door, as if someone were asking to come in. When that happened, they did not open it. Instead, they added another log to the fire and said softly, "You are welcome by this light." Then they fell silent. The wind passed, the fire flickered, and that was enough. The forgotten ones were remembered through such kindness. No names were written for them, no graves marked. Yet they were comforted by the smallest of gestures, a rekindled flame, a candle lit once more in their honor. And so, Samhain was not only a festival for the living and the ancestors, it was also the night of the lost souls, those whom no one called by name. In remembering them, humanity rediscovered its own heart, its fear, its mercy, its ability to open itself to what cannot be seen. As the night waned, the wind softened. The last moonlight spilled through the windows, falling upon the small hearths that still glowed. The Celts believed that in that moment, the forgotten ones smiled and dissolved into the breeze. They had found their way home, not to the other world, but into the hearts of those who still remembered that no one, not even the dead, is ever truly gone so long as a single flame is lit for them. When the night of Samhain reached its deepest point, the boundary between mortals and the other world almost vanished. The wind fell still, the moon stood motionless, and the entire world seemed to hold its breath. The Celts believed that in that fragile moment, humans and gods walked the same path parallel, never touching like two shadows overlapping in the glow of a fire. From the distant hills, people said they could hear faint music carried on the wind. No one could see the player, yet the melody was soft as running water, laced with the scent of wildflowers and wood smoke. It was the song of the ancient gods, the Tuatha De Danann, the immortal beings who once ruled the land before humankind came. They no longer appeared in human form. They were only sensations now, a flicker of light, a fleeting warmth, laughter echoing faintly across the dark. That night, the people did not fear them. The village gathered around the fire, and though no one spoke it aloud, all knew they were being seen. Children slept by the hearth, elders nodded softly, and the flames burned steady, as if warming both worlds at once. No one prayed for favors, because Samhain was not a night for asking. It was a night for remembering that all things coexist. The Druids walked slowly through the village, holding smoldering reeds in their hands. They drew spiral shapes in the earth, symbols of life's unending cycle, humans, gods, and the land turning around one another. None lost, only exchanging places. To them, existence had no higher or lower realms. Everything was part of the same cosmic breath. Sometimes a gust of wind would pass, tilting the torches. Someone would murmur, "They're passing by." No one was afraid. Instead, they bowed their heads and smiled, for it was a good sign that the gods had looked upon them and found their hearts at peace. The night flowed on, gentle as a spring stream sliding over mossy stone. In the firelight, mortals and divinities merged not through words, but through silence. One single world, undivided, where humans understood they did not need to rule nature only to live within it. And when the moon began to tilt westward, the wind rose again, carrying away the scent of smoke and the distant trace of music. The crossing between worlds slowly closed. The Celts looked up at the sky, grateful to have shared the night with their gods, not to seek power, but to remember that they, too, were part of the sacred. When gods and mortals coexist, the world knows no fear, only stillness. A warm, eternal stillness, born of understanding that every living thing, seen or unseen, breathes to the same rhythm. Time moved on, The wheel of the year turned again, and the fires of Samhain still burned on the hills as they had for thousands of years. But then came the sails from the east, the ships, the missionaries, the men who carried wooden crosses. With them came a new faith, a different kind of light, the light of Christianity. The missionaries looked upon the festival of Samhain and called it a night of demons, a day of darkness. They feared the sacred fires, the masks, the whispers sent to the souls of the dead. They tried to extinguish them, but the more they tried, the brighter the flames spread. For the Celts could not forget the light they had guarded for generations. And so, the church chose not to destroy, but to transform. Samhain became All Hallows Eve, the night before All Saints' Day. They said the fires now honored the saints, the blessed souls saved by God. But beneath the hymns and prayers, the people still remembered the older meaning that this was the night when the veil thinned, when ancestors and unseen gods came to walk the earth once more. The fires still burned, but now in the churchyards. The bread was still placed on tables, but now for pious souls. The children still wore masks, but were told it was all just for fun. The Druids were gone, yet their fire lived on in every household hearth. And Samhain, though renamed, endured. The Celts understood something profound. No religion could erase the seasons. No creed could halt the turning of the wheel. Though the names changed, the cycle remained, and humanity would always bow before the earth, the dark, and the mysteries beyond its reach. They embraced the new faith, but in their hearts, they kept the old flame alive, a fire that belonged not to any god or church, but to humanity itself. It was the symbol of life, of memory, of gratitude for both the light and the dark. Slowly, Samhain and the new faith flowed together like two rivers meeting at dusk. The Day of the Dead and the Day of All Saints merged into a single layered remembrance, both sacred and human. In the small villages, hymns of the new faith rose alongside the old drumbeats of the past. Candles burned upon altars, and another was always placed by the doorway for the souls with no names left to be spoken. And so, a new age began. Samhain was no longer the festival of one people, but the ritual of all humankind, a ceremony of remembrance for the fragile line between life and death, between faith and longing. Though renamed and painted with new colors, the fire of Samhain still burned quietly, steadfastly like the heart of the dark season, still beating across the centuries. Thousands of years have passed since the first nights of Samhain. The grassy hills have become cities, the great bonfires replaced by electric lights and carved pumpkins. Yet every year, when October reaches its end, when the wind shifts and the chill slips through the window frames, something ancient stirs again. People light candles, put on masks, and smile into the dark. They may not know the name Samhain, but they are still living its spirit. Children knock on doors, laughing, their hands clutching bags of candy. Adults dress as ghosts, witches, and the very things their ancestors once feared. Few think of it as ritual, yet deep within, humanity is reenacting that same old dialogue between fear and joy, between shadow and flame. Trick or treat is the faint echo of an ancient invitation. Come join us tonight. Let us celebrate together before winter comes. All over the world, candles are lit. Some are placed on windowsills, some float down rivers, and some flicker behind glass on rainy nights. But every flame carries the same intention, to call the light back home. Just as the Celts once did, we still face the dark season, not with swords, but with small fires, with faith that warmth still has a place within the cold. And if you listen closely on Halloween night, between the laughter and the wind, you might hear something faint, a breath from long ago. The wandering souls still drift among us, but they are no longer alone. They walk beneath the streetlights, among masked revelers, smiling quietly because humankind has finally learned how to live with the darkness without fearing it. Samhain has never died. It has simply changed its face, wearing the masks of modern joy pumpkin lanterns, candy, and festivals. But its meaning endures, a night to remember that life and death are not enemies, but two halves of the same soul. So when you light a candle tonight, even just for decoration, pause for a moment, watch the flame flicker in the wind, and think of those who came before you, of seasons that have passed, of memories still burning in the heart of humankind. For from the ancient hill fires of the Celts to the small candles in our homes today, one message has never faded. In the darkness, the light is always waiting to be called by name.